What if I told you that the secret to feeling fully alive is learning how to disappear? Pause before you picture a grand escape from your job, family, or responsibilities. This isn't about literal vanishing acts or ditching what matters most. The disappearance I'm talking about is more subtle, more profound. It's about letting go of everything that confines you. Old expectations, worn-out identities, unhelpful beliefs, and allowing your deepest essence to rise to the surface. When you step away from who you think you must be, you don't lose yourself. You open a path to who you might become. This can sound radical, yet it resonates with an inner call we've all felt. The need to grow beyond roles that no longer fit. Many of us sense that our daily grind and outer labels barely scratch the surface of our true potential. By disappearing, we're not fleeing our lives. We're casting off illusions and assumptions that stifle our expansion. We're stepping toward a richer, more expansive existence where real fulfillment is possible because we're no longer boxed in by what we think we should be. What we shed in this process are the outdated versions of ourselves, versions shaped by social pressures, family influences, or our own fears. Look around and you'll see so many people living in a way that feels slightly off. The alarm rings each morning, and we fall into a routine, doing what's required, all while feeling a vague emptiness. Often we chase the usual trophies, money, promotions, public admiration, believing that's what real success looks like. But we pay a price, shrinking our uniqueness to fit preordained molds offered by parents, peers, or the wider culture. We get so skilled at serving these expectations that we lose track of what personally fulfills us. Inevitably, there comes a moment when we ask, is there more to life than this? Imagine dismantling those expectations. Visualize stepping out of the categories you've been living in, perhaps your current role at work, your public persona, or even the behaviors you adopt to please others, and allowing the honest, unadorned core of your being to emerge. Think about the freedom of no longer telling yourself, I'm too old, I'm too inexperienced, I don't have time. Imagine letting all that fade away, as though you were slipping out the back door of your own limiting beliefs. What's left might be a new kind of exhilaration, the sense that you can become someone truer, someone who resonates with what you've always intuitively known you could be. Disappearing from the self you've been taught to be isn't about disowning your story or your accomplishments. On the contrary, it's about revisiting yourself with a fresh lens. You're not running away, you're redirecting your journey so that for once it aligns with your real passions and values. Sometimes, that alignment reveals wells of courage, vision, and authenticity you might never have guessed were there. The only parts that actually vanish are the roles and masks you've outgrown. Consider for a moment the question, are you ready to shed who you've been, step into the unknown, and transform so deeply that even you might do a double take? It's natural to feel uneasy about that. Our survival instincts crave stability, routine, and certainty. Yet the most transformative changes in life, falling in love, redefining your career, or moving across the country, often demand we abandon our comfort zones. We might label that risky or scary, but if you trace your greatest joys and personal triumphs, you'll likely find that stepping outside your comfort zone was necessary to bring those experiences into being. A wonderful metaphor is the caterpillar's metamorphosis. It seems content to crawl along twigs and leaves, but at some point, it forms a chrysalis, dissolves into a mysterious soup, and reconstitutes itself as a butterfly. Nobody calls the caterpillar reckless for undergoing that drastic shift. It's simply the natural blueprint for its evolution. Humans, with our intricate fears, expectations, and self-judgments, make our own transformations far more complicated. But, in truth, we also have an advantage. We can choose to enter our personal chrysalis. The caterpillar simply follows its biological code. We can become active participants in our reinvention. Of course, it can be daunting to contemplate how to begin. Sometimes, the simplest approach is to ask, who am I when no one's watching? Pull the plug on the external roles, breadwinner, caregiver, boss, employee, and tune in to your private self. What do you care about when nobody else has a say? Which pursuits bring you a sense of aliveness without requiring anyone's approval? These questions can feel surprisingly tough if you've spent years catering to external expectations. But confronting them is vital. If you can't recall a time when you lived for your own passions, you're likely overdue for some serious self-exploration. That first step, reconnecting with your authentic core, can involve reigniting old dreams or exploring new ones. Maybe you had a teenage passion for creative writing, but the demands of adulthood crowded it out. Or perhaps you've always felt a pull toward environmental activism, but convinced yourself you lacked the necessary expertise. It might be that you've been told you're too quiet, too bold, too sensitive, or too something else to pursue what truly attracts you. Dig past those old verdicts. This is about uncovering what sparks real excitement and vitality in you, not meeting someone else's criteria for success. Naturally, this effort at rediscovery can bring discomfort and even fear. The human mind is designed to avoid uncertainty. We prefer familiar habits even if they leave us unfulfilled. Yet look back on your most memorable accomplishments. They likely emerge from a backdrop of worry, unfamiliarity, or risk rather than from playing it safe. The aliveness we crave is often found at that boundary where comfort ends. In that space, we can't rely on autopilot. We have to stay fully present and engaged, which is precisely where real growth occurs. Interestingly, the more you release the identity you think you should maintain, the closer you get to your actual essence. The fear many people have is that they'll lose everything if they venture too far from who they used to be. Their job security, relationships, or social standing. Disappearing in this context isn't about irresponsibility. It's about evolving in ways that allow you to interact with life more wholeheartedly. You might discover that what once felt like an unshakable obligation starts to feel like a potential stepping stone. Or you might realize some commitments simply don't fit you anymore, and perhaps never did. A living example of this is Josie, a brilliant lawyer who appeared to have it all: a high-powered job, a top-floor office, and the esteem of her colleagues. Yet she was miserable beneath the polished exterior. One evening over dinner, she admitted that her entire career had been steered by her parents' aspirations and the lure of social prestige. She had diligently followed the script laid out for her: law school, prestigious firm, incremental promotions. But her sense of self had withered along the way. What truly stirred her was teaching. This realization wasn't sudden. It had been knocking at her core for years, patiently waiting to be acknowledged. Josie's transformation didn't involve a dramatic resignation the next day. Instead, she volunteered on weekends at a local adult education program. She found that guiding others, sharing knowledge, and witnessing that aha moment in her students brought her genuine fulfillment. With careful planning, she transitioned out of the law firm and into a teaching career. That step was difficult, but 2 years later, she sent a letter describing how fully alive and aligned she felt. She had, in her own words, disappeared from the shell of her old life and reemerged in one that reflected her authentic self. You might think, that's inspiring. But I have real bills, people counting on me, and a stable job I can't just abandon. And you'd be completely right. Practicalities matter. Yet the question is whether these are true barriers or useful justifications for maintaining the status quo. Disappearing from old habits doesn't necessarily require a large-scale upheaval. Often, it starts with small but strategic actions that collectively realign you with your deeper callings. Perhaps you experiment with a side hustle, take a night class, or set aside an hour every day to develop a skill you've neglected. Each step carves away the stone concealing the masterpiece underneath. Think of a sculptor approaching a massive block of marble. The potential statue is already there, waiting to be revealed. Every swing of the hammer, every careful chisel removes a piece of what isn't essential. Similarly, when you speak truth where you once stayed silent, choose progress over old anxieties, or act on your intuition rather than your conditioning, you're doing the sculptor's work. Over time, the unnecessary layers fall away, and you become more fully yourself. Of course, chiseling away old patterns can be terrifying. We cling to routine because, to the mind, it feels like survival. Even if a habit is harmful, it's predictable, which the brain interprets as safer than the unknown. Consider Tom, a talented musician who poured his heart into guitar solos in his bedroom but was paralyzed by fear when it came to performing publicly. For years, he hid behind the excuse that he wasn't ready. One day, he accepted a challenge to play a single song at a local open mic. He stumbled through it with trembling hands, messing up chords and forgetting lines. Though he fled the stage in embarrassment, he had crossed the threshold. For a moment, he disappeared from his fearful self and tested a new reality. Emboldened by the fact that he didn't spontaneously combust, Tom returned week after week. Each performance was a bit stronger, his voice a little steadier, his presence more assured. 6 months later, he was doing full sets at small venues, radiating a newfound confidence. Tom came to see that disappearing wasn't about becoming a stranger to who he was. It was about shedding the parts that kept him from fully sharing his natural gifts. By leaning into that discomfort, he found a side of himself he never dreamed possible. This gets to the heart of what disappearing and becoming unrecognizable really mean. It's not a total erasure of your personality. It's a removal of the layers that obscure the real you. Many of us unwittingly become unrecognizable to ourselves by betraying our potential. We choose convenience or social acceptance, slowly drifting away from the beating heart of what makes us unique. The process we're describing flips that script, allowing you to become unrecognizable in a way that shows your innate power instead of hiding it. Plenty of people reach a moment when they realize they don't even know who they are beneath their obligations. If that resonates with you, don't despair. Feeling lost about your true identity is a powerful sign that you're ready for meaningful change. It's akin to standing on the edge of a foggy field, unable to see far ahead but knowing you can't stay rooted in place. Though the path is obscured, the next step is clear. You must move forward, trusting that clarity will emerge with each stride. You might wonder, how do I start? Especially if the question, who am I, yields no immediate answers. Often you begin by exploring. That exploration could take many forms, like learning a new language, trying activities you've always been curious about, or volunteering in an unfamiliar setting. Pay attention to the sparks that flare up, moments when time seems to dissolve because you're so fully engaged. These sparks are markers pointing toward authenticity. They don't guarantee a linear route to one big purpose, but they remind you that curiosity and wonder are catalysts for growth. Consider Maria, an accountant who once excelled in all the right ways, good school, prestigious firm, but felt a persistent hollowness. Prodded by restlessness, she pledged to try something new every week for a month. Pottery class was fun, but not electrifying. Photography felt mild. Volunteering at a wildlife rescue center, however, was an entirely different story. She got dirty, scratched, exhausted, and she couldn't recall the last time she felt so alive. That solitary discovery, born of experimentation, became the doorway to a series of changes, from blogging about conservation to eventually specializing in nonprofit accounting. Over time, her career and sense of self evolved in tandem. She told me later that disappearing from who she thought she should be allowed her to reappear in the life she truly wanted. That's the subtlety of transformation. It's seldom one grand leap, but rather a sequence of deliberate steps that accumulate over time. Each time you choose authenticity, you're chipping away at the marble. Each time you say no to what doesn't feed your spirit, you create room for what does. Gradually, you may find yourself in a place so different from where you started that your former self would hardly recognize you, and that's precisely the goal. Of course, it's easy to say, but I'm stuck. I have responsibilities I can't just ignore, and use that as a defense against change. Being responsible doesn't mean you must remain static. Disappearing from your old mindset can happen within your existing environment. Take David, a middle manager drowning in corporate monotony. He assumed his mortgage and family obligations left him no freedom to explore anything new. Then he decided to see his job as a platform rather than a prison. He leveraged his lunchtime to develop a creative side project, volunteered for internal initiatives that piqued his interest, and approached everyday tasks with fresh experimentation. Over time, his colleagues saw a shift in his engagement and creativity. Eventually, the company created a new role for him that blended his traditional expertise with his budding passions. David didn't need to flee his life. He reimagined it from within, disappearing from the attitudes that confined him. This is a pivotal point. Escaping your life and transforming it are two different things. One is driven by avoidance, the other by growth. By choosing growth, you redefine the relationship between you and your existing commitments. Suddenly, what looked like a dead end reveals hidden doors. Tasks that once felt stale become opportunities for you to integrate new skills. Relationships that weighed you down might prompt you to communicate your needs more openly, or in some cases, to set boundaries for the first time. In that sense, disappearing is about shedding old narratives of impossibility and venturing into unknown possibilities. No one should pretend the road is always smooth. You will inevitably face days when self-doubt looms, when you question whether you have what it takes, or worry that the old versions of you are pulling you back like an undertow. That is where the metaphor of the chrysalis becomes especially relevant. The caterpillar's old form has to dissolve, an unsettling process that is neither quick nor painless. But without that dissolution, the butterfly can't be born. Humans, too, have to pass through a phase where the old constructs melt away, leaving space for something else to form. It can feel chaotic, but chaos can be a crucible for creativity and self-discovery. One of the best ways to stay on this path is to become clear about your values. Reflect deeply. What do you hold dear, regardless of external pressures? Freedom, compassion, integrity, learning, self-expression. Whatever your guiding principles, use them as a compass for decision-making. Whenever you encounter a fork in the road, ask which choice aligns best with those values. The closer your actions match your deeper truths, the more your vanished self reveals its authentic replacement. This is a process, not a one-time event. So perfection isn't the point. Progress is. Slipping up is inevitable. You might revert to old habits or allow someone else's opinion to derail you momentarily. Self-compassion is crucial here. Instead of berating yourself for not being further along, notice what you learned from the setback and readjust your course. Each stumble can teach you something about how you respond to triggers, what your vulnerabilities are, or which environments aren't conducive to your growth. Over time, these lessons become part of your arsenal, strengthening your resolve to keep moving in the direction of your genuine self. A potent exercise involves envisioning yourself in 5 years, having fully committed to this path. In that future, how do you carry yourself? What kind of work engages your time and passion? How do you interact with the world? How do you feel when you wake each morning? This visualization isn't a rigid blueprint, but a guiding star. Let it be the reminder that deep transformation is possible. You already have the ingredients for it. The journey is about bringing them together in a form that resonates with your unique gifts. When you open your eyes from that vision, remember that many of your current obstacles are less concrete than they seem. Some will be genuinely challenging, yes, but you may find that tackling them becomes easier once you commit to shifting your viewpoint. You might face resistance from the people in your life who are used to you in a certain role. Change can be unsettling, not only for you, but also for those around you. They might try, consciously or unconsciously, to keep you in your old shape. Recognize that this resistance usually stems from their own fears or from the comfort they find in predictability. It's not necessarily a sign that your transformation is wrong. It may simply mean you have to learn how to advocate for yourself differently. Sometimes this calls for new boundaries in relationships. You might have to walk away from circles that no longer nurture the person you're becoming. While this can be painful, it's also liberating. By guarding the space needed for your evolution, you ensure that you don't revert to a shape that no longer fits. You'll find that as you re-emerge, you attract new connections aligned with your evolving interests. This doesn't mean you discard loved ones en masse, it just means you hold firm when someone tries to tug you back into an old identity. Over time, the people meant to accompany you on your journey will adapt and grow alongside you. Or you'll find your paths diverge for the sake of mutual well-being. Failure, too, deserves a redefinition. In many environments, failure is treated as a permanent verdict on your abilities. Yet in the realm of personal growth, each failure can be a seed of insight. Like a scientist running experiments, you refine your approach every time something doesn't go as planned. Failure is not the opposite of success, but a component of it. Think of a toddler learning to walk. Every fall is a lesson, a small data point, not a sign that they should remain crawling for life. We cheer them on to stand up again, Offer yourself the same encouragement. Along the way, don't forget to mark even the smallest victories. Each time you opt for authenticity over approval, or choose a challenging new path over the comfortable old route, celebrate that choice. These moments might not attract attention from others, but they are milestones in your personal evolution. Acknowledging them, through journaling, sharing with a friend, or just taking a quiet moment of reflection, reinforces your commitment to shed what's false and embrace what's real. Curiosity is another powerful ally. Too often, we grow complacent, turning our backs on the playful, open-minded approach that helps us discover new passions and perspectives. Keeping curiosity alive means asking questions even when you think you know the answers, trying activities that don't neatly fit your current identity, and letting wonder guide you through unfamiliar territory. This not only expands your sense of possibility, but also trains you to adapt to life's inevitable twists and turns. By staying curious, you remain ready to disappear from static definitions and reappear in more dynamic, fulfilling versions of yourself. Throughout it all, practice patience and self-compassion. Lasting change doesn't happen overnight. Like the caterpillar dissolving in its chrysalis, your old ways might need time to break down before something fresh can emerge. Some days will feel triumphant, while others will leave you questioning whether you should abandon this path. Trust that the discomfort and confusion are part of the process. Growth almost always appears messy from the inside, but that messiness can be where the greatest breakthroughs occur. A simple yet transformative exercise is to close your eyes and imagine yourself 5 years from now, fully embodying the results of your metamorphosis. Envision the details, what you do each day, how you interact with others, how your surroundings feel, and how you carry yourself. Then, come back to the present and remember that this version of you is not a pipe dream. Each step you take, each belief you reevaluate, and each risk you embrace pulls that future closer to reality. If you worry about how others will handle your transformation, recall that you are ultimately the one living your life. You can empathize with their concerns, but you don't have to shape yourself to maintain their comfort. Sometimes your metamorphosis may encourage them to confront their own stagnation. Other times, it may create tension until they either learn to honor your growth or fade from your circle. Either way, understand that your choice to disappear from old patterns is a gift to both yourself and the world. The real you has more to offer: more sincerity, more creativity, more depth. Revisiting the idea of failure. Think of each miscalculation as data. Perhaps you try a project and realize halfway in that it's not your passion after all. That's not a waste of time. It's valuable information guiding you to something more aligned. True failure would be never stepping outside your boundaries in the first place. By risking the occasional stumble, you grant yourself the chance to fly. Remember to track your progress. Even tiny shifts, like a change in morning routine or an honest conversation you once avoided, are significant. Documenting these wins can motivate you during inevitable slumps. Over time, you might find the sum of small changes has led to a reality that bears little resemblance to where you started. By then, you will have become unrecognizable in the best sense, free from the limitations that once held you back. Curiosity pairs wonderfully with lifelong learning. Whether you sign up for courses, teach yourself from online resources, or seek mentors, continuous education keeps your mind flexible. In a world that's always changing, being willing to learn allows you to disappear from outdated versions of yourself whenever necessary. You can continually adapt, becoming someone who not only copes with change, but actively pursues it when stagnation threatens. Be patient with the rough patches. Like any metamorphosis, there will be moments of confusion or fear, times when the old version of you tries to reclaim the spotlight, or when the new version of you feels shaky. These moments are normal. Without them, there would be no real transformation. If you ever feel overwhelmed, practice self-compassion. Treat yourself as you would a dear friend on a courageous journey. Offer reassurance rather than condemnation. When you imagine your fully blossomed self in 5 years, notice how that version of you thinks and behaves. Maybe you're taking creative risks without second-guessing yourself. Maybe you're making decisions from a place of conviction instead of appeasing others. See the energy in your body, the sparkle in your eye, the confidence in your stance. This vision isn't some far-fetched fantasy. It's a portrait of who you can be when you remove the layers that obscure your potential. As you return to the present, hold on to that image. Each day you have the chance to move closer to it. Every time you challenge an old assumption, every time you lean into curiosity, and every time you choose authenticity over passivity, you're leaving behind something that no longer serves you. On the flip side, you're stepping toward new skills, connections, and perspectives that will form the foundation of your metamorphosed self. Some people in your life might resist these shifts. They might question your decisions or try to steer you back into behaviors that once kept the peace. Recognize that their resistance usually mirrors their own fears or their own attachment to stability. You can choose empathy without surrendering your forward motion. Respect that they have a right to feel unsettled, but also remember that you have a right, indeed an obligation to yourself, to explore your path to wholeness. Not everyone will follow, and that's okay. Your journey might inspire them later, or it might not. Either way, you are allowed to outgrow places, people, or situations that cannot support your unfolding self. Gradually, you learn that disappearing from old versions of yourself is a continuous process. Growth doesn't end with one big decision. It's a lifelong series of choices. Each layer of self-discovery reveals new dimensions of possibility. You may transform more than once. Perhaps you'll discover a second passion down the road, or you'll reinvent your relationships in ways you can't currently imagine. The point is to remain open, curious, and willing to dissolve the cocoon whenever you sense you've outgrown it. Through it all, remember that taking deliberate steps toward the unknown is precisely how you shape the extraordinary life you've long sensed was possible. If you cling to what is safe, you may avoid short-term failure or discomfort, but you also risk missing out on the joy and richness that arise from taking bold strides. Disappearing, in the sense we've discussed, is not running away. It's a purposeful release from the constraints that prevent you from living fully. That release, in turn, creates space for a new, more vibrant self to make an entrance. Ultimately, the world doesn't benefit from you living an existence that suffocates your potential. By removing yourself from the roles and routines that feel too small, you free your imagination, generosity, and vision. You start shining more brightly, and this radiance can spark positive change in others who see the authenticity of your journey. Rather than a selfish endeavor, this blossoming can be a gift. Your life becomes an example of what happens when someone dares to leave old limitations behind and step into uncharted territory. So this is your invitation. Disappear from what constrains you and reappear as someone more aligned with your convictions, creativity, and longing for meaning. Vanish from the facade you've built to please or protect yourself and let the genuine you stand in the light. Your metamorphosis may surprise people who thought they knew you, but it will also inspire them to look at their own lives in new ways. Most importantly, it will confirm for you that transformation is not just a fairy tale. It's a real, ongoing process anyone can embrace. In that spirit, allow yourself to consider what disappearing looks like for you. Is it speaking truths you've kept inside for too long? Is it learning a new skill that stirs your soul? Is it reclaiming your weekends for personal growth instead of continuing the same old social obligations? Is it finding a community of peers who support your unfolding rather than holding you to your old scripts? Each act of choosing yourself, of aligning with your essence, is a small disappearance from who you used to be. Each courage-fueled step reveals more of the remarkable person you can become. There will be stumbles, doubts, and moments when the safety of the familiar tempts you back. Yet every time you resist that temptation, you cultivate resilience. Every time you confront a fear and decide it's worth the discomfort to see what lies beyond, you strengthen your resolve. Over time, these incremental changes build up, and you look around to find you've transcended the old framework entirely. You may hardly recognize the mindset that once kept you captive. In other words, you've disappeared, at least from the vantage point of who you were, and reappeared in truer form. Stay attuned to this process, celebrating your forward steps as milestones in a larger narrative of self-discovery. Journaling can be a helpful way to capture the nuances of your transition. When you write about your thoughts, struggles, and insights, you give yourself a record of how far you've come, On days when self-doubt creeps in, you can flip back through these pages to remind yourself that growth is underway, even if it's not always immediately visible. In the end, the notion of disappearing is less about escaping and more about unveiling. You're revealing capacities, talents, and passions that were hidden beneath layers of social conditioning or personal fear. And by letting those facets breathe, you bring more of your genuine self into the world. That authenticity enriches your own life and can also benefit everyone around you, modeling a depth of living that goes beyond the superficial trappings of success. Yes, it can be intimidating. Yes, it requires stepping into places where no roadmap exists. But if you heed the call to disappear from everything you're not, you stand to gain the incomparable fulfillment of living as who you really are. In that sense, learning to disappear becomes one of the most vital skills you'll ever develop. It's an ongoing invitation to break free from any identity that constrains your spirit and to keep evolving in tandem with your aspirations, values, and capacity for love. So here is where you stand. At the threshold of your own chrysalis. The path may involve messiness, unlearning, and reinvention, but the potential reward is the freedom to expand into your fullest self. Embrace the disappearing act that sheds your false layers. Trust that what emerges will be a richer, clearer, more radiant version of you. Someone ready to soar where once you only crawled. The world is waiting for that authentic self to step forward. Let today be the day you accept the invitation to vanish from limitations and step into the wide open field of possibility. Your wings are ready. All that's left is to take flight.